Test, test. 1, 2, we're testing. Okay. Hello, and welcome to the Saturday morning symposium. I am John, and I'm here to answer your composition questions. I see we have Matthias on saying good evening. That's funny. You're clearly in a different part of the world. We got Henry. Hello, Henry. Hello, Ilka. Good to know that you can hear me, and let me know if you can hear the piano as well. I just played a couple notes there. So, hello, Robert. It's always fun getting things started here. I hope everybody's had a good week, full of music and composing and orchestration and whatever we all have to do. I have not done a lot of music this week because we are still finishing off our bathroom here, and I was working with the plumber on Wednesday and just doing a lot of stuff. So it's been a very low music kind of week, but I'm hoping this next week I've got 2 film scoring projects I'm working on, and I'm going to jump deep into them. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, and also if the levels are good, just give me a thumbs up in the chat. That helps. Ashton, that is a good question about which coffee creamer I use. I do not use cream. I use butter and MCT oil. I have jumped on the bulletproof coffee bandwagon. I don't know if you can see this here. What's good about bulletproof coffee is it tastes delicious. I know. Oh, let me say, unsalted butter is critical. You don't want salty coffee. I think that would be kind of gross. And you have to blend it. So you add unsalted grass-fed butter, and you add MCT oil. I do a couple, like 4 squeezes from our little bottle thing, and then you blend them. What's good about the butter is that it's got, I don't know if it's got 0 lactose, but it's got a much lower level of lactose and casein, the proteins that are found in milk. It's mostly fat, so you get the kind of the good energy from the fat, and you don't get the kind of upset stomach that can come along with milk creamers, and the MCT oil as well. Now they say that the MCT oil crosses the blood-brain barrier and helps power your brain. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. But I do know that I've been doing it now for a few years. I've had several physicals, and I've seen a heart doctor, and everything seems to be going well, so the fat's not causing heart problems. And it fills you up in the morning, keeps you going for a few hours, so you can kind of do that intermittent fasting stuff, which is good for just good, clean energy. I try to eat a high-protein breakfast as well, and stay away from carbs in the morning as best as I can. So if you're interested in some of this stuff, the Bulletproof website, Bulletproof Executive, or Dave Asprey's the guy's name. He's got a lot of good info on it. And then obviously Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Body, is a really good book on just learning some basic stuffs about diet and exercise. So that's what I would recommend. I also go running, usually about four days a week or so. I play Ultimate Frisbee. I try to go out at least once a week to play Ultimate Frisbee. So exercise and good diet are critical for anybody in any field, but especially somebody who's got to use their creative juices all the time. The thing in your body that uses the most energy by far is your brain. So you've got to power that brain, because we are brain people here as composers. We are thinkers, and this is what we do. So I'll get off my soapbox and start answering some questions. I see you. Hello, Pavi. It's good to see you. Hello, Vasco. Good to see you again as well. Let me go back here. Let's see. Ilka's saying he's had some compositional blocks and starting and stopping, not finishing. I feel your pain. I think it's something that everybody goes through. So some of the tips that I have for composition blocks, the first one is, I want you to sit down today and write the worst piece of music that you can. Just sit down and write the most bland, the most pedantic, the most the weakest thing that you've ever written that generally still follows the rules. And I almost guarantee by the end you're going to really like it. Every time I've done it, it's just something I've noticed. So purposefully sitting down to write bad music is one of the ways, because really you're not necessarily having blockages on ideas, is my guess, especially if you're starting and stopping. What I think most creative blocks are like inner voice saying that this is not good. And the reality is almost everything that we write at first is not good. So if you can get over that, then you'll find that you'll finish a lot more stuff. And I think it's also why film composers are able to put out a lot of music, and a lot of it is actually good music, and it's because you don't have a choice. It's like when you've got to finish a project and you've got to do so many minutes of music in so much time, you're just forced to write. You just have to write. You got to get from beginning to end. And often, just getting to the end with bad music, you start to see where the problems are, and you can go back and fix them. And often, the ideas that you have are not bad ideas. It's just some problems in execution in the middle. So yeah, that's kind of my main big tip for creative blockage is really just sitting down to write bad music. And you can put it another way. Just sit down to write music. Just do the work. Doing work, you start to come up with ideas. It's the same thing that I found with writing about music, is that the more I write about music, the more I write garbage, often that's when I start to come up with my good ideas. It's like writing. Where did I read this the other day? That writing is thinking, right? It's thinking, but it's kind of doing it in a way where you can let go of the idea. And like I said just a couple minutes ago, we're thinkers. That's what we do. We think about music, and we put those ideas of music down on paper. And often you have to think that stuff out, on paper first before you find out what's actually good out of it. So yeah, that's my thing about creative blockages. Have you ever written a theme and variation piece? Yeah, I've done theme and variation. I haven't done a lot of theme and variation. I don't know why. It's just something I haven't tried all that often. Maybe that'll be a good exercise for this week. Everybody try to do a theme and variation, and we can show them off next symposium. Maybe it would be kind of a fun thing. What's cool about theme and variation is it's kind of the same concept of getting to the end of your piece and getting to know your piece. You start to see possibilities in what you've written. So varying the melody, varying the harmony, varying the speed, varying the intensity, all those things. It is a lot of fun. I haven't done it all that much. I think it's because my focus really has been on film scoring the last few years. It hasn't really called all that much for theme and variation style. So yeah. Let's see. Pavi's got a question regarding harmonic sequences. He says, I get the concept, model sequence, but how they sound, how to do it, but I get stuck implementing in context. I usually have an issue with the timing. So let's see. The sequences either feel incomplete, or they need to keep going, or they went too long and the timing of the phrase is off. Well, sequences are tough, and I'm not going to lie. I've had some issues with integrating sequences in a really solid way. And I think the thing that helps me the most is to know where you're going, and to back up a little bit, and to figure out the pacing of things. Because there's so many ways to break it down. I mean, you could do sequence off of each like quarter note. You could do sequences on the half notes. You can vary the way the sequence, like a half note and then 2 quarter notes, things like that. And as long as you generally know where you're going, I think it's a little bit easier to connect the dots. So like if you're just doing a sequence over, you're starting at C and you're ending at C, right? You can literally count the number of chords that you're going to be going through, and you can kind of connect the dots. So maybe we could try this out a little bit. It's always a little bit risky to do this, because I run the risk of doing it incorrectly live. So once again, I like to preface everything that I do with composition is messy, and composers make a lot of mistakes while they compose, but great composers will spend the time to fix those mistakes. And, I was reading about Ravel and his working process, and he was known for being a slow composer. But it's not so much that he composed slowly, it's that he would spend a lot of time fixing little tiny issues in his pieces, part writing issues, parallel octaves and fifths, playability, tweaking little bits here and there. So spending the time to correct the issues that you have, and you've seen me compose plenty of times on these symposiums. Sometimes I feel like I get it, like first try, it's like a nice chord progression, nice melody, and I'm happy with it. Other times I walk away embarrassed, like I can't believe I wrote what I wrote today in the symposium. But that's the reality of it, and it kind of goes back to the creative blockage. Just write something bad, and work your way through it. Work out the kinks as you go. Don't worry about getting it right the first time. So first off, let's just start with just something simple, right? Let's see. Oops, I messed that up. There we go. Okay, so we've got a little sequence there, right? Ascending fourth, descending fifth, whatever you want to call it. And in fact, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put this on the bass line right here. And I'm also going to zoom in so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm also going to, I think it sounds better down an octave, but I think it's a little bit easier to read up an octave. So at this point, this is just keyboard style. I'm not too worried about voice leading or anything like that. But I've got just a general idea of, where this sequence is going. And we can see here, you start at this one, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And I guess if you count this one, 8, which makes sense. I mean, if you're making your way through a diatonic sequence, there are 7 notes with the 8th one repeating, which means that you generally have, to get to tonic within the same key, you would have 7 chords to go through. Now, if we wanted to, in fact, I'll zoom out a little bit here. If we wanted to fill up 4 measures, right, we could do this. Obviously, we could expand this out to where we've expanded them out all to half notes, right? That's pretty clear. Now, if we wanted the 4th measure to be the cadence, we could do something like this, right? If we wanted to change the rhythm a little bit, like this, you can start to see why using it as a connection between two things that you already have, two ideas that you already have, can be a little bit more useful than trying to just do it on the fly. And it's just, it's a matter of numbers, and it's kind of mathematical in the sense of, I've got to fill 4 bars with 7 or 8 unique notes, and I've got to do this in a way that feels logical. Now, you may want to do this within 3 measures where you have maybe an increase in the harmonic rhythm, right? You could do, and we take away this one right here. There's lots of ways you can start to compress or expand the whole thing. And I know I'm not writing all the other chords up here. Let me go ahead and do this. Little 9th. Like that. Now, if you wanted to, you could start to change things up, right? We have these abilities with diatonic harmony to quickly turn any chord like into a seventh chord, then move it on to where it's got to go. So maybe this is going to sound cool, something like that. So let's hear this. So we just used that sequence, and we didn't make a big change. All I added was the seventh here to go to F. But that's exactly the kind of thing. It's like if I know I want to go to F, and I know I want to go to F after 4 measures, then you can find really simple logical ways of doing this stuff. And I could have backed it up like that. So do the pivot right here, and I think it would sound really cool. So I just did a sequence from C to F, and it was not a huge mental exercise just to count the notes, write the sequence out, and figure out a way to stretch it so that it fits the amount of space that I need. So Pavi, I hope that helps you a lot. You said it works here. I hope that's in response to what I'm doing. I don't know if you're talking about Dorico or you're talking about what I've explained here. Sequences are one of those things that it's almost like remembering the ranges of some, like the alto flute. It's like, I don't remember the bottom and top note of the alto flute. I'm just going to look it up. If I'm going to use a sequence that I haven't used in a while, like maybe ascending thirds or, ascending seconds or something, I can't remember exactly how to do that. I'm just going to look it up real quick. And by the way, in the workbook for the Music Composition 101 course, I've written out all those kind of standard diatonic sequences. So you got a great place to look them up. But, yeah. So, okay, let me see what else, what other questions people have. And Pavi, actually, let me pull this chat out because I can't see everybody's questions really quickly. Let's see. Vasco's asking if I'm going to do the webinars on YouTube from now on. Yeah, it seems like it's been working really well on YouTube Live. People have been giving me feedback saying that they like it more. The questions from students are usually a little bit more pointed because you got to type them, and it's easier to get the questions out quickly and for me to answer. Let's see. Francisco asks, first time here, hello. What do you think about Cantis firmus? I think Cantis firmus is good. I don't know. I mean, obviously using a Cantis firmus to do traditional modal counterpoint is a standard practice, and it's something that I think every composer should at least be familiar with. You don't necessarily have to master the subject. I think it's a good thing to practice and do occasionally. If you want to use a Cantis firmus that you've written, that's also a good thing. What you're doing is, just like everything else, you're setting a restriction for yourself. So you are saying, I'm going to restrict myself that all of my counterpoint has to work with this single melodic line. And doing that opens up new possibilities that otherwise would maybe get squashed in subordinating yourself to trying to come up with, trying to fancify the melody a little bit. So a Cantis firmus, it's just like every other compositional tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. I don't know what kind of evil you could use a Cantis firmus for, other than maybe harassing and torturing undergraduate students in college. So I don't know. If you can figure out an evil way to use a Cantis firmus, I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are. So let me see. Hello, Kel. I see you've written there, and you've been here for a little while. So hello. Let's see, Ilka. Yeah, you were saying kind of about our earlier discussion. You seem to be happy for the first 8 bars, and for some reason I stopped there, and then you start a new piece. Well, you just have to push through it. I mean, in some respects, the first 8 bars sometimes feel like it's a given. It's the next 12 bars that seem to be the hardest, or however many, if you do a 4-measure B section and then you do a repetition, with the recapitulation, the first 8 bars sometimes feel like they flow the most, and it's like, where do I go from here? And like I said, just write something. I mean, if you've written a great 8-measure theme and you feel like you really got something and you don't know where to go with it, just stick on 5. And then go back to 1. I mean, there's a reason that, in the contrasting middle, we say it generally focuses on dominant prolongation. And that's because it does. And what's cool, this is something I learned from jazz about dominant chords, is that the dominant chord can handle like anything you throw at it. So obviously, right, you can do something simple, very diatonic, right? But you can start to go outside. As long as you resolve it back to where it wants to go, right? And you can put a little more tension in it, You can add. That's why dominant chords always have lots of extensions, or like these kind of cool polychord kind of stuff that you do. Dominants, for some reason, they can just handle a lot of tension that you throw at them. So don't overlook this idea of dominant prolongation, because in reality, you'll see these long pedal tones where I mean, I was just hitting kind of random triads there at the end, and it all seemed to work out because I went back to 1. So if you start your theme on 1, right, you can always go to a dominant prolongation in the B section, and this is the power of these traditional classical forms. They give you all sorts of tools for expanding your works out. So if you write your 8-measure theme, and you get to the end of 8 bars, you do a small dominant prolongation in the middle, you've already got your A prime section, right? The recapitulation is basically a repetition of the A section, the exposition, with the redundant material removed. That's kind of the normative way. Or you can just straight up do a repetition and maybe add just a little bit of ornamentation or a little bit of, whatever, a little more drama at the cadence or something like that. But those are tools to get you through those kind of moments where you're like, I'm not sure what to do here. And I think anybody who's composed for a while will know that getting to the end, you start to see the possibilities. Like, oh wow, you know what? I could expand that cadence. I could do an expanded cadential progression here, or I could maybe do a some other kind of deviation on it. Maybe I go to a deceptive cadence or something like that. So let's see. Let me move on to another question here. How much of the theory do you use when composing? Meaning, do you consciously use theory to compose, or are you trusting your gut feeling, and use theory to analyze your stuff afterwards if needed? That was from Matthias. That's a good question. I think it's kind of mood based. Sometimes I sit down and I just rely on theory. And especially if you're in a period of creative blockage, you go with what you know, right? I mean, I could, without hearing something, I know I could write something generally that works based off of just basic theory. And maybe that would be a good exercise. Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. And that's not to say that a lot of times I just sit down and write music. Right, I just write with whatever feels good, and that is good too. I mean, it's a mix. It's what's working for you at the moment. It's what's working for you in general. Oh, so make a final bar there. I'm going to delete these. You'll see that I am I'm setting up my page here, so that I'm basically giving myself as much advantage as possible. I'm doing normative 4-measure ideas, right? And I'm going to do an 8-measure theme, and I'm going to do exactly what I told you to do, which was to do a dominant prolongation, contrasting middle, basically focusing on 5, right? I'm going to focus on 1 over here. I should probably put that down here. I'm going to go back to 1, right? I'm gonna end on 1 over there. Oh, sorry, I got to do this. This is critical. I'm turning off the playback. So this is composition sans feedback, other than visual feedback and what I know. So what I know is that I can do a tonic prolongation, right? So I'm going to write some simple chord progressions here, right? 1, let's see, and then I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do an exact repetition. I'm going to make it a, let's see, a cadence. And yes, I'm doing these in like large block chords. And right now, I'm not concerned with getting my voice leading down. I'm not concerned with a lot of the details of composition. I'm concerned with big gestures, big muscle movements, right? Now, I'll just throw in the theory here. This is 1. This is a 5, 6, 5 chord, which is a 7th chord in first inversion. Back to 1, 5, 6, 5. And I apologize if I don't get to people's comments while I'm doing this, because I'm looking at my notation, so... let's see. This is a 2, 6, 5, 7, 5, 7, 1, right? And then that's just a 1 again over there. Now here we're gonna just do. I'm just gonna put 5, and then over here I'm gonna make sure. Over here I'm gonna make sure I do a 5, 7. I've got this text expander thing, and for some reason, it's freaking out on me when I try to do it. 5, 7, like that. And then, let's see. Here, we're going to, if you know what recapitulation, what you'll normally do is take out redundant material, which means repetitions of things, right? And then here, we're going to do, nope, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do 2, 5, 1. It's like this. Roman numeral 2, 5, 1. Okay, so now we've got an outline harmonically. Now, I could write a melody in a lot of different ways, right? But what I know is going to work is a chord tone melody. So I could do something like this: C, E, D, B, right? Very basic. C, E, D, B, C, E, D, B. Now, I could write out the whole thing as just general half notes kind of stuff. But right now, because I'm doing repetitions, things like that, I think it'll save some time. I'm going to go ahead and connect these chord tones. C, let's see. And then why don't I do something like that. Da, ba, da, ba, da. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I want this. Oh. Okay, so now I've got a repetition of that basic idea. It's a basic idea, right? Let's put let's do some text. Basic idea. This is composing by theory completely. Repetition of the basic idea, right? And then now we're writing a sentence here. So what we're going to want to do is a continuation phrase. Now, continuations generally have an increase in harmonic rhythmic. The harmonic rhythm, so you generally have shorter chords, but it's not necessary. This would be in a continuation / cadential phrase. We've got basically one large cadence going on here, so you don't have to do all of the techniques of continuation in everything you do. Once again, I know another critical thing of continuation is fragmentation of your ideas, right? So effectively, we've got a couple different motives from our basic idea that we can pull from, and we've got this da ba da ba da dun dun da da or ba 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 da 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 ba 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 da ba da ba da da. Maybe we'll do this one. I think this one feels a little more natural. So, and then we'll just do this da 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 da. Da, 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 right? So we're adding in a ninth here. I think this is going to sound pretty good. Let me change this back to continuation. And maybe we'll do like da, da, da. Nope. Da, da, da. Okay. This will probably not be the best thing I've ever written, but more important, I've written it and I've got something of which I can come back and modify. You know, so I can start to add in more chromatic harmony after the fact. I can add in, maybe we can find a place for a sequence, right? And then, okay, so now we're going to go super simple here. We're gonna do, why don't we do this? We're going to just keep things simple. We're going to do, let's see. But, oh, that's not what I wanted. I wanted a, hold on. You know what? Let's see. I may change this because this seems like a lot of. Let's see. And then we're gonna just take this over here. Okay, so let's just do that. So I think at this point, we'll do a little cadential 6/4 here, and then boom, like that. Now we want to come back here, maybe write a little bit of melody, and after I finish this up, we'll take a listen to the kind of basic, super simple, purely theory-based composition here, and then at that point we can maybe decide to go forward on it or not. But you'll kind of get the point. Once you get something, it's a lot easier to modify something once you have something down. So here, dun da da da, dun da da da, dun da da da, da, da. Let's see. We'll do this. Da, da. There we go. Okay, we've done it. We basically. This is, let's see, simple piece. We'll just call it that. Put it on the desktop. So let's listen. Now, there's a lot of nuance that needs to be added to this. I'm not going to deny that. But let's just hear what this sounds like. I guarantee it's going to generally work okay. Now here, maybe we can add a little bit to keep that going. Right? Obviously, obviously needs a lot of work, needs a lot of nuance. We want to think about voice leading. We want to think about adding chromatic harmonies, all sorts of stuff that we could do to this. But I've got something that I can work with here. I've got something that I could modify. I mean, I could come back here. I can say I want to do this, but now instead of this, right, I can do. I don't necessarily like that because we have what's called a cross relation here, where you've got chromatic change between the two voices. So, we can play around. Plus, on top of that, we've got we've got similar or direct octaves or hidden octaves. I mean, there's like a bunch of names for these things. So maybe we do this. There's a million ways you can start to modify and work on your pieces, but this is an example of not going with gut feeling first, but going with what you know first, and then using the gut instincts to modify, change, to do something to it so that it seems to work better. So hopefully that answers your question. That's always a fun exercise for me, composing without any kind of feedback other than your brain trying to understand the notation that you're doing. You can see it wasn't a ton of work that I did. It was actually quite simple. It's chord tone melodies. It's basic diatonic harmony. I didn't really modulate anywhere. But now I could come through. I could say, well, maybe I want to figure out a way to make this modulate to a new key. Maybe we want to go to A flat major or something. You pick something weird and then figure out a way. Just like we connected the dots with the sequences, we can connect the dots with modulations, where you have a starting point, right, where you're at, and you have where you want to go, and you have only a certain number of bars. You've got 3 bars. You could look up what's a good path to do that. What's a pivot chord between the two? Or if you don't have a pivot chord, find an intermediate key that does share a pivot chord between the first key and the second key, and the second key and the third key. You can start to figure that stuff out mentally, but you're kind of leaning on both gut feeling and theoretical stuff. Okay, so let me keep going down the list here. Henry kind of asks a similar question: when composing, arranging, orchestrating, how do you flow consciously or subconsciously within your head? I mean, really, it comes down to it's the way your brain processes information. When you are composing something, you're using what you know, you're listening, you're getting feedback, you're going with gut feelings, but you are also learning that piece, right? Now, it just happens to be that you're learning it at the same time you're coming up with it. But just like when you read a book, right? If you're trying to read a book about a new subject, you read it the first time through and you may gather some of the information, but you have to start asking yourself questions about this. What's missing here, right? You may not have the answers right now, and this is where the subconscious comes into it. When you go away, when you take a nap, when you go to bed for the night, you take a shower, you kind of turn off your compositional brain, things actually kind of bounce around to different areas. There's a really good course on Coursera called Learning How to Learn, which I recommend everybody sit through and watch, because they explain a little bit how learning works. And part of it is, I think they call it consolidation. And there's this period of consolidation in your brain where information actually gets connected to other information, and you start to make that web of understanding and knowledge. That happens subconsciously after you learn something, and it happens when you're not actively thinking about it and learning new things as well. You've got to give yourself that mental space, which is why I recommend exercise. Exercise is one of the absolute best ways to get insights about your music. If you write some music and you have a compositional problem you're trying to work out, go on a run, go take a shower, take a nap, do whatever you do. Do something where you're kind of playing. That's why I love Ultimate Frisbee. It's a great workout, and you play. You get into that flow state, and that's when the ideas come. So thanks for that question, Henry. Let's see. And David White, hello, good morning. I see you there. Let's see. The road cone. And, also, if you're new here, I told everybody last week, if you got a question, if you put question in capital letters at the beginning, I see it a lot easier, so I can get to your question quickly. Let's see. Do you have any tips on composing Baroque style music for the harpsichord? Yeah, well, obviously, if you want to sound Baroque, you need to study and listen to a lot of Baroque style music. So Baroque style music, obviously, Bach is the place to start and end in some senses. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different Baroque composers that you can pull from, but immersing yourself in the genre as much as you can, you'll start to feel this stuff a little bit more, and that's where the gut feeling about composition comes in. Is that you have a gut feeling that what you're doing is right, or that what you're doing is unique, but still maybe within the confines of that style. Obviously, getting a good grasp on voice leading, chorale style voice leading. Counterpoint, Baroque style counterpoint. Usually, it's very often much more instrumental based. So the melodies and the lines tend to be very, fast moving, lots of notes, things like that. I would just get in there, start reading a lot of Bach music. Like pull up the scores, listen to it while you read it. Get a good book on, Baroque counterpoint. I mean, there's a million of them. The Kennen book, that's what I went through. Peter Schubert's got a great book on Baroque style counterpoint. What's the one? There's one that's called 18th Century Counterpoint, but I can't think of who the author is right now. There's just a ton of stuff out there. You kind of find the flavor that you like to get your information the most. I just finished up the book by David Huron called Voice Leading, and it is an incredible book. I really highly recommend it for people because what it really applies to is how does your brain listen to music, and how does music make sense to your brain a lot of times. So there's a lot of really deep insights in that book if you take the time to read through it. It's not that long. It was like 150 pages or something like that. So it really doesn't take that much time to go through. But in previous symposiums, we've written some kind of Baroque sounding style counterpoint. There are a lot of rules. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of rules if you want to make it as authentic and accurate as possible. But you don't necessarily have to do that. You may just want to get close, and that gets you really excited. That gets you learning more. That gets you improving. You want to improve. So it's this balance of being too hard on yourself on the rules and just having fun with writing music. We don't want to make this stuff unbearably dense and difficult to do. So I would recommend find some of those symposiums where I talk about it. There's one I called The Cheater's Guide to Counterpoint. And then there was another one with where we just sat down and kind of wrote something that's kind of 18th century sounding, but we had some little quirky things in there that weren't quite 18th century. But the counterpoint generally works. What I found is some of the most helpful is to when you write, once you get your chords down, write your melody, and then start to create the counterline off of that. And the easiest way to do this is to just write sixths, right? Six intervals of sixths and thirds most of the time, right? So if you see something like C, write an E. If you see an E, write a C, right? Now, there are lots of rules in terms of with traditional counterpoint, you should start with this, like an octave on tonic, or a fifth on a tonic and a fifth or something like that with modal counterpoint. But we're just scratching the surface, just talking about the basics. The other aspect of it is if you've got movement in one line, you don't have movement in the other. And then if you've got, and vice versa. So if we were to do this, right, we could do B. Oop, that's way too high. B, D, right? Now these may not be harmonically fully complete, but you'll get the point. And then just like I connected the dots above, and sometimes it's a matter of figuring out a kind of a logical way to do this. Find some space and give it that little bit of extra movement. Right? Not the greatest counterpoint. It didn't sound all that amazing, but you start to get the point is you can add things, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming to start to add this stuff. All I did was I said, I'm going to do a sixth here. I'm going to do a sixth there. Do a sixth there. Sixth there. Now, another easy way to do this is also generally have root position chords on strong beats, you know? So there we just add a little bit of movement. You know, nothing crazy special, but you can start to see how it doesn't have to be all that difficult to create, you know, effective counter melodies. Just like that. Not the best, you know, is it 100% traditional Baroque counterpoint? No, obviously it's not. But is it a counter melody to my melody? Yeah, and can we start to refine things? It's like you see B and you see B both going to C, then we know that we've got to change something. We've got to change this or change that. Oh, maybe I'll do this. I'll do like a double dot here. Right? My counterpoint teacher is probably like, ugh, this guy. But we're basically just trying to get something down so that we can work on it later. That's some of these goals of these initial sketching, getting your ideas down kind of session. So let me move on here. Ilka, what would be the typical usage of applied dominance in a sentence or period? I mean, would continuation phrase be a good place to start experimenting with them? Yeah, obviously, you know, continuation, one of the aspects of continuation is that it's slightly loosening on the tightness of the phrasing, right? So you've got tight-knit phrases, eight measure normative phrases, basic idea that prolongs tonic, repetition of that, and then a continuation. The continuation often has sequential harmonies. It often has chromatic harmonies because the continuation itself is like a loosening factor on it. So if you want to start experimenting, you know, find these points. Here we've got a 2 chord. I could throw an A here, right? And then we could find a spot. We can see if. Oh, oops. If we turn that into a 5. Let's see, 5 of 2. Now, one aspect here that I noticed is that this going 5. Oh, this probably should be maybe root position there or something. 1, 5, and then 2. This was a little mistake that I made, right? But if we go to a 6 chord, which is effectively what this is, and then turn this into an applied dominant, now we've actually improved our functional harmony here, right? It almost acts like a little deceptive cadence. And then we move here. Let's hear what this sounds like. Right? It's still not very nuanced at this point, but you can start to see it's not hard at this point for us to start experimenting, start improving, start finding the mistakes that we made, you know, the kind of the core theoretical fundamental mistakes, like we didn't follow pure functional harmony, right? We had, this would really be considered a regressive, right? We went from tonic to dominant to predominant, right? That's a regressive progression. It goes the opposite direction, and that can be an issue. Now, one thing I've noticed is it's a lot easier to get away with those things at these formal boundaries. So we have a basic idea. We have a repetition of the basic idea. That's a formal boundary right there. So, and the bigger the formal boundary, usually the bigger you can handle big juxtapositions of, you know, harmony, things like this. So I could change this like this. I just pulled everything up. Let's see. Right? Dun, dun, dum, bum, bum. it doesn't feel as jarring because we hit this big formal boundary, and there's a little bit of closure. Especially if I were to give it a little bit of rest or something like that, you get that closure, and closure allows you to open up new possibilities without disrupting everybody's mind and ears. So yes, start experimenting on the continuation, and obviously the contrasting middle, like I was saying with dominant prolongation. It doesn't just have to be this; it can be cool pedal points. You can really start to experiment with applied dominance. You can really start to experiment with really cool things over dominant prolongation, and an area where you've got a little bit more freedom harmonically. You'll notice, like a composer like Haydn, you'll see him frequently go from, tonic is like 1 and it's a major thing, and he'll modulate to a flat 3 within the contrasting middle. He does it in a very nuanced way, so it doesn't feel like a chromatic mediant progression. It just feels natural. So. Okay, let me move on. Charles asks, when writing bass clef for a melody, my understanding is finding chords that contain the notes in the melody. How do you gain experience in choosing the right chords for proper voice leading? Well, in some sense, functional harmony gives you a lot of tools for proper voice leading. A lot of functional harmony. Let me make some more measures over here. Why am I not seeing? There we go. If we were to just line up the chords, right? You got 1, 6, 4, 2. Oh, sorry. We need to have a 7. Let me back this up. And then 7, 5, 1. Let me... Oh, actually, I should be practicing my shortcuts. I think it's Command... No. It's Command Option B? Nope, that's not the run. Hold on, I gotta look this up. Practice your shortcuts. Command Option Shift B. Bottom note, right there. So we're looking at a bass line. We're looking at some chords, right? We got 1, 6, 4, 2, 7, 5, 1. Those are the different chords that we got going on. You'll notice that functional harmony gives us some interesting tools. So we've got E is held between the two chords here. C is held between the two chords here, right? A between the next two, and C as well. F and A, F and D. If I put this up, you can see F and D. D, F, and B are all held, and we add a G, and then G goes here, the 7 goes up to 1, and F goes down to 3. So functional harmony itself gives you a way for good voice leading if you follow just the general flow of functional harmony. Now, if we add, on top of that, you add applied dominance and stuff, you start to get really cool ways of doing these moves that sound that work well with good voice leading. So, in a sense, yeah, functional harmony baked into functional harmony is good voice leading, and if you practice it, you'll be good at it. But in general, the basic way to get good voice leading is just find the notes that are the same between two chords, right, and stick to those. So, if we do, some augmented thing, right? That sounds cool. We change that down. You still have only a whole step of actual voice leading movement, like real, pitch space. You only have a total of one complete whole step between this C major and A flat major, because we're holding the C over. We have this going up by half step and that going down by half step. And it works going back to F, getting back into functional harmony. So there's a quick way. That's why chromatic mediants have baked into them good voice leading. And you'll find that most progressions that work have already baked into them good voice leading. So hopefully that points you in the right direction. If I didn't quite answer your question, you can clarify a little bit lower. Let's see. Road cone. Maybe you wrote that second question. It's basically the same question, Baroque style music. So I'm going to skip it here. Let's see. I think I already answered that. Let's see. David asks, changing key signature with applied dominance. So now chord progression is with respect to a new tonal center or local tonic. Is it, let's see, easier to explore a variety of harmonic coloring? I'm not sure exactly what the question is. If you could clarify the question, are you asking? Yeah, just repost it, clarify it a little bit, because I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Let's see. Zach asks, when recording a virtual solo instrument, how do you most effectively program the automation data, velocity, crescendo? Do you do it live or after the fact, drawing in the box? I generally do it live. I've found that you can really get a good nuanced performance. I've got a couple, techniques that I like to use. One is slowing things down, right? So you create your tempo map. And, oh, shoot, there's an issue with my drive. Hold on. Turn it off, turn it back on again. Give me a second here to see if my sample drive shows up. I've got a local sample drive, and I've got, obviously, my Vienna Ensemble Pro for hosting all my other samples. If you're serious about film scoring and getting, good mock-ups and stuff, it's hard to have complete orchestral templates on your computer, one single computer, without a massive, very robust machine. But you'll find that you can probably get, for a lot cheaper, an extra OK computer and Vienna Ensemble Pro for a lot cheaper than you could making your one machine super powerful. So and then you can max out your RAM, and then sometimes the processor can't keep up with everything on one computer. So that's just the benefit of having two. So what I'm going to do here, though, is I'm just going to open up. I've got my contact open, and you'll find that live. Oh, you know what? I'm going to let the things load. You see the little yellow little tab there. That just basically means it's still loading up the instruments in the RAM, or the samples in RAM, so it'll get a little bit choppy. I've experimented with what is the quickest way for me to do this, and what's helpful for me is that I do my composition. Usually, I start on paper, right? I'll come up with thematic ideas. I'll come up with the core of my compositional ideas on paper. I just find that the freedom that paper offers is just, it just doesn't limit you like computers do. And then I'll realize my composition in Sibelius. Now, I've got a full system that I've worked out that really works for me for film scoring. Normally, I'll spot my film in Digital Performer first. I'll do my tempo maps in Digital Performer. I'll export sheet music, and I will write onto that sheet music. Let's see if I've got, I don't know if I've got any here right now. Here's an example. This is not too much. This film that I'm doing right now, I don't know if it's kind of hard to see, but you can see in Digital Performer what I did is I went in and I figured out basically my tempo, and if you can see that there, it's kind of hard to notice, but it's 49.5000008. I mean, it's like a ridiculously precise tempo. But what that allows me to do is it quickly allows me to say, how many measures do I have until some critical moments? Now, with this one, it's a little bit less. It's not like animation style where I've got like 100 million things to hit. It was more like general feeling. So this is a pretty low intensity thing. It left me a lot more room to write. You can see, though, I started to come up with my ideas here, but I didn't fill up the whole page. I mean, sometimes I fill in ideas. Sometimes I work my way through them a lot more. I've got some other films where I filled up basically everything by paper, and then I only took it to Sibelius after that. But generally, you can get your head wrapped around the amount of space and amount of time that you've got to fill up. I mean, if I say you need to compose 4 minutes of music, that's like, wow, what does that mean? Does that mean I've got to write a bazillion notes or what? But when I say you're at a really slow tempo of 49 beats per minute, and I've got to fill up. You know what? I didn't normally. I print this out with measure numbers. Oh, you know why this doesn't look the same? This is my Sibelius version. I took it over to Sibelius. I reprinted it because I wanted it to quickly print it out for string quartet with the piano underneath. But normally I've got the bar numbers. I've got the hit points. I'll see. Maybe a little bit later if I can find a sheet of paper that's straight out of Digital Performer. But it gives me chunks to think about. It's like, oh, actually, what I've got is I've got 4 sections that are 8 measures each and 1 section that's 12 measures, right? That's much easier to wrap your head around. It's like, oh, I've got a theme. Maybe I can repeat the theme and modulate. Maybe I can do a contrasting theme that's 8 measures, and then maybe I've got to do another repetition of the original theme and drag that out for 2 or 3 more bars. That is mentally much more easy to do than to say, write 4 minutes of music, press play in your DAW, and go. But this is critical, is that your DAW, and there's some other guys who really got me onto this idea. One of them is Brian Ralston, who, if you've listened to the Scorecast podcast, he's talked a bit about this. He was my teacher at UCLA. Your DAW is a performance. It's a place for performance. Now, you can compose, and if you got to do something really quick, yeah, you get your DAW, you just knock it out really quick. But if you think about your music outside of your DAW and then you perform it in your DAW, usually you get a much better product. You get a much better mock-up of everything. So I write my music. I'll export my parts, and I'll see if I can. Let me see if I can pull up an example of my finished parts. Give me a second here. Let's see. I'm going to pull up something from a film I did. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Let's see. So, okay, so here we go. I'll put this underneath for a second. Here's an example of something. This was for another film that I did where I had, in the DAW, I kind of sketched out some basic ideas maybe about what I wanted to do, maybe general sounds or harmonies stuff. And I know for a fact that I didn't use what I wrote here. I changed. I didn't use these. But what I did use was the hit points. So you'll see I've got the hit points marked out. I've got tempos, right? I've got frame numbers here. I've got bar numbers, things like that. I've got points where I change the time signature. I do all of that lifting in Digital Performer before I even start to really write the notes. And another one of my teachers who has written a lot of music for animation, Charles Fernandez, his thing is that you spend the time figuring out the tempos and the bars and how you break down your score first. And while you don't think you're composing at that moment, you really are. You're coming up with like ideas kind of subconsciously, and that starts to manifest when you actually sit down to write music. What I was able to do then is take this stuff into Sibelius and give myself a really good, clean template to work from. Now, from there, I'll pull up one of my scores. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see. I find the PDF. Now, let me switch to this window. And let me close that one. You'll see, let's see, and put this up here. You'll see this now. This is that cue, and you'll see that that's that 5/4 bar that I had before. I wrote this as a traditional orchestral score, and then what I did is I had individual parts. So if I keep going down here through the score, blah, 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 you'll see I've got real parts, right? I'm actually coming in here. Now, a lot of this was actually for just the DAW. So some of these things, like I wouldn't give this probably to a real piccolo player because that would be unbearable to play. But for a DAW, you can get away with a lot of stuff when you're using sample libraries. So just keep that in mind. But I come in here and I play real parts. I actually try to perform these as best as I can. I'll turn down the tempo if I have to. You know, for me to go, you know, right over and over again at the right tempo, that can be difficult. So maybe I'll perform one bar at a slow speed and then copy and paste it, you know, transpose it up a little bit. But you end up getting a much more realistic shape of your notes, especially if you're writing the stuff. Let's see. I see Henry there posted. Yeah, Charles Fernandez is a good composer. If you're in the LA area, he's giving a concert with the LA Winds in Agora tomorrow. He's premiering. I don't know if it's actually a premiere, but he's having a piece played for tuba and wind band, which is actually, I think, going to be really cool. So that was kind of a long-winded question, you know, kind of roundabout. Yes, I perform stuff in, but I perform it from parts with the idea that I'm like performing it like a real performer would perform the part. So you're not winging it in the moment. Let's see. MM Sensei says, it's difficult to find full scores for film music, so what are other good ways of studying film music than reading scores? I think you'll be surprised. There's actually a lot of film music scores online. Some guys, like I think Marco Beltrami, released all of his scores on his website, and you could download that. I don't know if it's still active, but that was a while ago. He'd put that up there. And, you know, there's obviously the John Williams signature scores. There's stuff floating around. I would say make some friends with some film composers and say, hey, do you have some stuff? Google film scores, PDF, right? You know, obviously, like, there's copyright issues, things like that. In the other sense, it's like, it's not like you're going out and stealing something that doesn't, you know, the guy's making money on a scanned copy of a handwritten PDF. Nobody's making money on that anymore. They're not even selling that. Omni Music Publishing, they publish full, really high resolution, high quality, fully engraved film scores. Those are good. There's sketches that are out there. If you Google around, you can find a lot of really good stuff. And yeah, just dive into it. I found that, you know, it seems like it can actually, you can build up too much of a library and end up not actually getting into the music that you like. So find one score that you really like and dive into one page of it or 2 pages of it. You'll probably learn more doing that than getting 1,000 scores and you know, brushing through 5 of them really quickly on a Saturday or something. You know, spending time in the details is really where you get most of the benefit. But you know, you know, a great ones are like the John Williams signature scores from Hal Leonard. You can get those. They're expensive. You know, you're paying like $40 for a thing. But go on WorldCat, right? This is a search engine that searches libraries worldwide, and start to search for scores there. Find your local colleges that have a music library. Often you'll find some stuff there. I think you'll be surprised. There actually is a lot of full film scores that are available, free and legally. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube where people have taken it and they've put the music to the score. I know for a fact, like, you can find a lot of, I think it was called Film Music Breakdown. I'm not sure, but there was a lot of Bernard Herrmann scores where they've taken the music, they've cut it to the image of the handwritten score, and they've put it as videos on YouTube. So go check out that stuff. You can learn a ton that way. Also, I mean, yeah, you're right. Sensei's saying that you know, the movie studios have a tight grip on this stuff. I know it is infuriating. Nobody wants these things but other film composers, and we just want to write better film music for the studios. It seems ridiculous. Like, why wouldn't they release this stuff? It's just what they do. But you know, maybe we as a community need to make a concerted effort to try to get more film scores out there. You know, I'll try to maybe release some of my film scores that I've done for short films, and you can learn a little bit about them. I'll see if I can post some of those on my website. But yeah, you know, let's try to convince the studios, write the studio heads and the music departments, things like that. Like, hey, let us have these things for study purposes, because nobody's making any money off them anyway. I mean, I heard that it was like, Warner Brothers has got a great music library, by the way. So if anybody can make it to the Warner Brothers music library, there's tons of stuff there that's like incredible to see. Like a lot of them are facsimiles, so they've copied them, and the real scores are like in Kansas in some cave or mine or something. But you can see like the handwritten sketches from Casablanca. You know, like incredible things that most people will never be able to actually see. Mm, let's see. Sibelius technical question. What do you use for your figured bass Roman numerals input in Sibelius? Roman numerals or lyrics? I use the Roman numerals, and I use that simply because you can do proper like seventh chord things. So you see here the 5, 6, 5. You do 4 and then shift, and 2 here. You take it to a 4/2 chord, which of course would be closer to this. So yeah, I use the Roman numeral feature in Sibelius. I can't remember if I added the shortcut. I think I created the shortcut where if you don't do this in Sibelius, you can come over here, preferences. And in fact, I don't think you can see my preferences window because it's a separate window in the way this program works. But you can come add keyboard shortcuts. Add shortcuts for the things you use. I use Roman numerals all the time when I'm doing this stuff. So I do, Command, Option, Control, Shift, R. Normally, if you do all 4 of them, it's not very difficult for your fingers to press, and those ones haven't been taken up. But if it's taken up for something else, like, maybe Command, Option, Shift, R is like rehearsal mark, I think is what it was. Oh, no, I made that a repeat, or, if there's a shortcut that you don't use, overwrite it and, make it your own thing. Let's see. Other questions. Let's see. Okay. Well, if anybody else has any other questions, I think I've gone through a lot of the questions here. Personally, I've been just kind of separate note from the questions and what we're talking about. I've been still thinking very deeply about orchestration and working my way through the ideas that I have. I found that my frustration with the orchestration books and stuff that are out there is a lack of clarity of thinking. I like thoughts to be as succinct and clear as possible, right? And which is why I'm just raving over the voice leading book, is because you can tell he spent like 15 years just clarifying simple ideas, like why do we do voice leading? That is a big question. That it's like, you go to a college music theory class and it's like, you're going to learn Bach style chorale, and a student asks why, and it's like, because Bach did it, right? That's usually like the best answer that you give. And it's like people have got these fuzzy feelings about why we do things, but they're never really able to answer fully. And he's able to say, well, Bach-style chorale writing is, in fact, I should grab the book to read you the quote. But effectively, if you can do Bach-style chorale writing, right, 4-part harmonic writing that moves with synchronous note onsets, all in the... Thanks, Tim. You hate Bach-style chorale. Thanks for backing me up there. No, Tim. Tim is a good friend because Tim is my cousin. The secret's out. Bach-style chorale writing is about the hardest thing that you can do to try to create individual separate streams, right? These individual parts, trying to keep them perceptually different, right? And still blend well together. It's like the most difficult way to create perceptually independent parts. If you can do that, orchestrating when you have different timbres becomes a lot easier, right? Writing counterpoint where you have asynchronous note onsets, meaning this note hits and then that note hits, all becomes a lot easier, because what you've done is you've pushed yourself in the most difficult way to write, a chord that would otherwise just be one, musical object, one auditory object where your brain hears a chord as a single chord that, where the octave blends together and the fifth blends together. You've got the third in there. If you can do that, a lot of other things become easier. So that's really a core of why we do that. And I found that it's like when I sat down, I said, why do we orchestrate? What's the point of orchestration? I don't have a really great answer for that. I Googled it. Nobody's even asking that question. Why do we orchestrate? Now, obviously, we can come up with a lot of reasons, right? We can say that it creates maybe stronger emotions in listeners, right? You can get a bigger emotional impact out of people with a full orchestra than you can with a single piano, right? But that's not necessarily why. I mean, there's obviously points that people orchestrate for all different size elements, and sometimes it seems like the music doesn't have any emotional impact at all. So is that really the reason why? You know, is it because we can? Is it because it's traditional? I don't know, but the one idea that I had, and this something I was writing down earlier. I wrote down what are my goals with orchestration, and I wrote the goal of orchestration is to add complexity, like making a more difficult puzzle to solve, or ear teasers is what David Huron calls it in the book, while maintaining stream segregation, layer integration, and scene intelligibility. Now, I know that's a kind of a technical definition, but basically, you're trying to make as difficult an auditory puzzle as possible, while it's still solvable for the person listening. It's still intelligible for that listener. It's a puzzle that's not impossible to solve, right? You're trying to avoid confusion with the listener. So basically, you know, you're trying to make something that gives the person almost like an ear workout, right? You have to stretch yourself a little bit to fully figure out what's going on orchestrationally, but that gives pleasure. There's pleasure for the listeners in solving these problems. Now, I'm not saying that this is the end goal definition of why we orchestrate. These are just the ideas that are floating around my head and what I'm trying to really nail down, but just I'm posing it out there as a question to the community. Think about it. Let's come up with some really clear, succinct, whys. You get into the literature and you read what is good orchestration, and there's all these things. A good orchestration is clear orchestration. Well, what is clear orchestration? What does that even mean? Good orchestration requires creativity from the composer. It's like, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean you're coming up with unique instrumental combinations? It's like, well, no, because there's lots of composers that seem to be good orchestrators that don't necessarily have unique combinations of things. But with a clear definition, something like this, you start to say, good orchestration adds complexity without losing intelligibility, right? You're creating a puzzle that is difficult to solve, but not impossible. If you've got, I was trying to explain this stuff to other people, and I was like, if I've got my kid's puzzle, right? My 3-year-old's puzzle, it maybe has 4 pieces. For him, it's a lot of fun. He fits them together. It's great, right? For me, I'm like, this is not that much fun. It's simple. I go, boom, 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 done. I fit all 4 pieces together. You give me a puzzle with 100 pieces, and now I'm not a big puzzle guy, so I'm not going to say I'm having a ton of fun with the puzzle, but it's an analogy. I'm going to have more fun with that puzzle. It's going to be more of a mental workout for me, and it's going to be a lot more satisfying when I figure it out. And your brain, when it parses auditory scenes, actually gives you pleasure when you figure something out. And there's corollaries to this. When you can't figure something out, or when something is a problem that you can't get around. For instance, you're at a movie, right? And a guy sits in front of you and he's got a really tall hat, right? He looks like the man in the yellow hat from Curious George. And yes, I've watched a lot of Curious George over the last couple of years with little kids. That is going to be annoying, right? You're actually going to feel annoyed at that. And I think it's the same way when you have an auditory scene, right? You've got orchestration where you can't really correctly parse the individual parts and streams like the composer thinks you can. It's actually less pleasurable to listen to, which is why, not to downgrade anybody's, creative expression or things like that, but when I listen to orchestration that's from mid-20th century and it's serialistic and it doesn't follow these auditory principles, how your brain actually listens and understands things, then you get less. I personally get less pleasure out of that. I make it a point to listen to a lot of music, different styles, to try to expand my horizons. But what do I listen to for pleasure? I listen to Mahler. I listen to Ravel. I listen to Strauss. I listen to Wagner. I listen to Bach. I listen to Mozart. These composers, they work within the confines of how the auditory system actually works. That's my personal opinion on that stuff. But I think it does get to the point of what does it mean to actually orchestrate well. So let's see. I got some more questions here. Official launch date for the orchestration course. I can't officially put out a launch date. I'm working fast. I actually shot a promo video here for it. I'm going to start editing together. But I've got a lot of heavy lifting to do still in terms of organizing my ideas. I can give you somewhat of a preview of the way I'm organizing the course and how I think about things, and a lot of it has to do with perspective. When you compose, you're in the perspective of the composer, right? You're thinking about musical logic. You're thinking about the flow of ideas, and does it make sense logically? But you have to somewhat change perspective a little bit when you're orchestrating. You got to think about the listener a little bit more, right? It's not just all coming from a single piano at this point. So you're thinking about, how does this actually make sense to a listener and to their brain? How is this going to make sense in a real environment? Beyond that, you also have to take the perspective of the player. Now, you don't necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to make it easy for the player. That's not necessarily your goal, but it has to be playable, right? It has to be something that a player can do, or else you're going to have to figure out a way to split it up, change it so that the player can handle it, or two players can handle that. And what I would recommend is everybody go listen to a podcast called Meet the Composer. They were interviewing John Adams, and they were talking about the Son of Chamber Symphony, this piece that he wrote for this group, which the host, Nadia something, I can't think of her full name. But they talk about how he went to the rehearsal and there was a part for a flute that keeps going up, and he decided to change it to where he gave part of it to the flute, then part of it to the oboe, and then the flute changed to piccolo. And the players actually didn't like that. They said they wanted the challenge, so they're able to. They asked them, and they said they can play the unauthorized version or something like that. So, and then on top of it, the third perspective, which isn't talked about all that much, is the perspective of the administrator, right? The person who actually has to put the dollars down to hire the musicians, to get the venue, things like that. You may have all these grand designs for the greatest symphony ever written for a 200 member orchestra, like the Mahler's Symphony of 1,000, Symphony Number 8. Chances are no one's ever going to play it, right? But if you write something for 12 instruments, that's doable. If you write something for 12 instruments that high school players can play, that's absolutely doable, If you write something for string quartet, it's not that expensive to pay some college kids to play it, and it's definitely not that expensive to hire some professional players to play it. So, in the grand scheme of things, I mean, you can get that done for a few $100. So that's kind of the third perspective. It's you're composing from the composer's perspective, but you're orchestrating from the listener, the player, and the administrator's perspective. And I think that's a good touchstone for actually approaching this problem of orchestration. So no dates yet. I'm sorry. It's going to take me a few more months. But originally my goal was kind of halfway in the year to finish the course. I'm getting there. I'm collecting my ideas and really getting them secured. So yeah. Let's see. Zach asked, what software do you recommend for somebody who prefers piano roll versus classical notation? I mean, we've talked about DAWs in the past. Any DAW can do just about anything if it's a professional level DAW. Logic can do pretty much everything. Digital Performer can do just about everything. Reaper can do just about everything. Cubase can do just about everything. It's really specifics, and the most important thing is whatever you pick, learn it really, really well. Read the manual, get on the forums, join the Facebook groups, ask questions, and just use the software a lot. You'll get to know it really well. Let's see. Obsidian Steed asks, what's a good resource for beginners at orchestration? I mean, there's a ton. Obviously, there's books that have been out there for years and years and years. So the problem with some of the older books is that the style of the language can be a little bit difficult to get through. Orchestration Online, great resource. Thomas Goss's videos, he gives you a lot of reference on things, the Orchestration Online Facebook group is a phenomenal group because you can post your questions there and you'll get a lot of feedback on it. I mean, you got a group over 10,000 people. You're just going to get a lot of feedback. Obviously, I'm going to recommend in a few minutes my orchestration course. I've got a podcast episode that I go over orchestration and kind of what I think about it. Some simple ways to approach orchestration. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Tim Davies' website called Debriefed, his blog, he's got a lot of really good rules of thumb on how to approach things. A big thing that he pushes is what's the orchestral default. If you know how players are going to play something, then you can make your score a lot cleaner, and you don't have to get too muddled up about all these details about this and that. So let's see. Let's see. A question from David White, usefulness of literally changing key signature. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so to get back to David's question, he's talking about modulating. Yes, changing key signature is useful in Sibelius during composition, right? So I can come over here and I can say, we modulated to A flat major for this section, and now you're not going to get nearly the same amount of accidentals changing key signatures. Right, things start to look a lot cleaner. Or actually, no. Here we were in an A flat major. We're a D flat major. So, boom, right there. Right now, one thing if you're scoring for it's a debreved, Debreved for anybody who's looking for Tim Davies' blog, like breve. Semi-breve, like notation, a breve is a double whole note. So I think it's kind of like a plan where it's like debriefed, right? Another book that I highly recommend if you can find is called Creative Orchestration by George Frederick McKay, or MK. I don't know how he says his name. I think he passed away. I don't think he's alive anymore. But that's a really good book. Gives you a really good perspective on it. Obviously, having a book like Samuel Adler's book, I think I've got it back there. You got to have a reference book for orchestration because there's so many details on things that it's hard to keep a lot of this stuff straight. But that isn't to say that you should know the basics on the standard orchestral instruments. Like, you need to know that generally the bottom note is kind of the most important. Although for a lot of brass and like embouchure kind of instruments, the top notes are important too. But like you got to know that the lowest note on a violin is G unless you change the tuning, right? That way you don't make those beginner stupid basic mistakes like writing an F for violin below the staff. They can't play it, don't write it. So having a good reference book is good. That one is good. Obviously, there's the Cambridge Guide to Orchestration is a really good reference book as well because it's got a ton of stuff on like additional techniques and things like that. And then I would highly recommend that you saturate your ears with what these instruments sound like. You'll hear a lot of great orchestrators say that you'll learn the most playing in an orchestra, and it's so absolutely true. I mean, I grew up playing in wind bands, so I know the sound of a flute intimately, or a clarinet, or a trumpet, or a trombone. I just know what they're going to sound like. I don't have to think deeply about it. I wasn't around a lot of strings, and it took me a while to get more comfortable with violins and cellos and the limits of what they can do. And I was always confused about string crossing and bowing and things like that. In reality, most instruments can play most standard kinds of lines. It's the details, it's those little technical bits that can cause trouble for people, which is something I do want to approach and answer in my orchestration course. I'll show you some books that I got at the library the other day I'm excited about. I got this one book. It's called Wind Talk for Woodwinds, and it's big. I mean, this is a thick book here. But what it is it's written for people who teach instruments, not necessarily like the great pedagogic, the one person who teaches flute their whole life and he's an amazing flute player. This is for somebody who's got to like run like a high school band and has to teach this stuff, or a grade school band. But what they do is they go in here, they'll tell you issues that players will have, things to look out for in junior players. And this is important because you'll learn, and I apologize if you hear my 3-year-old sound like he got hurt or something. He's got a little crying out there. It tells you problems that players will have and how to deal with them, right? But just knowing the problems that they're going to have. So here's an example. I think we're on the flute section here. One problem, cracking notes. Let's see. Solution. Cause 1, articulations are too harsh. Embouchure not properly set. Hitting keys unintentionally. Leaks in the instrument. Loose or detached springs, right? This sounds like it wouldn't really be all that important for the composer, but you know that there's a million ways for those people to crack their notes, right? So you want to give them the best possibility of not cracking notes. And it could be the way that you write it. Now, that may not be the best one, but for trumpet, right? Cracking a note. I know it's really hard to come in like really high quietly on a trumpet. You got to play a high G pianissimo in the middle of a whole bunch of like really quiet playing, you're really nervous. And if you're a French horn player, you're like 10 times as nervous because it is easy to crack those kinds of notes. So maybe you give them a little lead in, right? If you're writing for trumpet and it's not all that critical, give them da 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 ba 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 ba, right? Those are the little tactics that we use when orchestrating that improve playability, right? You're not necessarily wanting to change the core of the idea. You're just making the idea fit better with how a player would want to play that line. And that's where I say you're composing, you're orchestrating from the player's perspective at that point. You're first starting with the musical logic. You're writing, you're getting your ideas down. Then you're moving on to how the listeners are going to hear this. Then you move a little bit to the players, and maybe you bounce back and forth and bounce around all three of them. And obviously this administrative idea of how much it costs and where you're going to be able to perform, things like these all factor in. So yeah, those are my ideas on things. That's where I'm going with stuff. Let's see. Okay, so any last minute questions? My voice is starting to run out of steam here, and it's about 12:30, so it's been about an hour and a half. Going to be moving on to lunchtime. And while I'm waiting on these last minute questions, I want to say go ahead if you're interested in learning to compose, if this is something new for you, check out artofcomposing.com. I've got articles, I've got podcasts, I've got videos, and most importantly, I've got 2 very thorough fundamental courses, Music Composition 101 and Music Composition 201. The 101 course is a foundational course. I teach you about harmony, I teach you about melody, form, how it all comes together, how to ornament your melody so you can write more kind of nuanced, cool sounding melodies. And then the 201 course is really, it's called sonata form, but it's about developing your music and how to write pieces that are longer than 8 measures, which is a problem that a lot of people have. How to write something that's more than 12, 16 measures. How do you write a piece of music that's 4, 5 minutes long, 10 minutes long? That's the core of what that's about. And where we really dive into it is these ideas of loosening techniques. You learn to write these normative, tight-knit 8-measure themes, and then you learn to expand them through loosening techniques, things like extension, where we add on, chunks of, like individual functional units. Expansion, where you're expanding within. You take a 2-measure idea and you make it 3 measures, right? As opposed to taking a 2-measure idea, repeating it again, and then repeating it again. You take a 2-measure idea and you're adding on chunks. Interpolation, where you add in things that are not necessarily related to the original idea. Asymmetrical grouping, fusion. These are all like, if you can get your head wrapped around these techniques, they're really cool, really usable. So check them out if you're interested in learning to compose. I mean, you see what's possible with just a little bit of theoretical knowledge. We weren't even listening to this piece when we wrote it. So, okay, Buncat Bo has a question. Have you ever written klezmer, gypsy, folk inspired music? Can't say that I have. So sorry. I mean, like everything else, a lot of this music is based in just standard ways of writing diatonic music, and then there's details that are different. With klezmer music, obviously you got to have a clarinet in there, or else it's not probably going to sound right. You're probably going to be using like kind of harmonic minor or like Hungarian flavored scales a little bit more than you would necessarily writing something that sounds like it was written by Mozart or Beethoven. So yeah, I don't have a lot of good resources on writing gypsy folk klezmer music, but like everything else, get on Google, start Googling around, go to Google Scholar, go to Music Theory Online, go to WorldCat, start looking for books. Google Books is a good place to search as well. You can find a lot of information out there. Good, Ilka. I'm excited for you to get on a 201 course. I want to see where you go. Ilka's been a student for a few months now, and it's been really cool watching him develop. So maybe one of these symposiums, we feature Ilka and we bring him on and he can chat with me and we look at his pieces from the beginning to the end, and you can see you will get real development in this stuff. So yeah, check out the course. I think with that, I'm going to call it. We've been about an hour and a half, and I hope you enjoyed the symposium. Yeah, next week is a Friday evening symposium. Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. A couple weeks ago we had daylight savings, so check your clocks. I try to post the like a day or two before the updated time, the updated world time clock. But basically, next week's going to be Friday. The next week after that, Saturday, this same time. So I alternate to try to get more people around the world. And with that, have a good rest of your day. Write some music, do some studying, and relax your brain. Go on a run. Drink some bulletproof coffee. Have a good diet. I don't know what else I can say. I'm just saying, like, basically do the right thing most of the time. So, okay. Talk to you later. Thanks, everyone. Out.